the Szilvi show. Welcome to the show. And today is an episode about tips how to become a guitar builder. What it takes, all that stuff. So it's going to be pretty educational. So if you maybe just graduated and you were thinking about, maybe I'm going to be a guitar builder, or maybe you just totally burnt out at your job at the office and you're creative and want to do something different. So this show might be really good for you too. And maybe you're a musician and you're just interested about talking about guitars all the time and listening to people talking about guitars or instruments. This might be a good show for you too. So the Szilvi show is always about something different. So it's a different topic each time. So this is today. And I have a special guest, Caroil, who is with me here. And I welcome him to the show. Maybe he'll join me. Maybe he won't. Okay, so while we're waiting, oh, there he is.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Hanging out. It's a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. So I'm in Portland, Oregon, and Grant is in Washington, in Seattle,
Yep.
right?
That's right.
Yeah. So super international. And to the listeners or viewers, feel free to comment, say something, say where you are, where you're watching from or listening from. That would be super cool to know. It would make me happy, and I'm sure it would make Grant happy too, right? Yeah.
Certainly.
So let's get started.
Okay.
So, Grant, how was it? So all of a sudden, one day you wake up and you say, "Oh, I'm gonna build guitars from now on."
Right.
So what happened? How did you become a guitar builder?
Okay. Well, so first of all, it was something that I got interested in a few years ago when I noticed that people were starting to get in the habit of custom building their own guitars. I noticed that people were designing and building things that were not really available on the general market. So, custom options that suited them as players ideally. And I thought it might be fun. So I decided, hey, maybe I'll dip my toe in this and see how I do with it. And so the first thing that I discovered was that there's actually a number of manufacturers of various parts. And so on, like the various wood parts, necks, bodies, so on and so forth. And there's really quite a lot of options out there. Some of them are relatively inexpensive. There's, I would say starting at $300, somebody could build something, that competes with what they could get from a store. But the market goes way, way up from there. There's actually boutique manufacturers of parts that some of the wood parts can run in the hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So it's really just a matter of what you're seeking.
So how old were you when you started?
This was about 2 years ago.
Not. Let us not talk about age. When did you...
Yeah.
So when did you start? How long have you been doing it? Let's put it that way.
About 2 years. Been 18 months, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. So the very first one actually that I built is sitting right behind me. This one, the very reason that I built it was because it was something that I could not just go to a store and purchase. This one was actually built with parts from a company called Warmouth, which is actually based out of Seattle. And it is in the style of a Fender Telecaster, except it has this abnormally long neck on it. You'll see it has 24 frets, which is unusual for a Telecaster. And the reason for that is because it's actually baritone scale. So it's tuned down to A. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's tuned way down. It's actually out of tune right now. Additionally, it's also made out of maple, like the entire body
Hmm.
and the neck and everything. And then the fretboard on it is ebony. Um, and so this combination of woods is not something that's ever been available on the market, mostly because it's heavy. This thing, it's hard to tell um, just by looking at it, but it's about 14 pounds, which is a lot. What is that in kilograms? Five and a half, something
Yeah,
like that.
so it's quite heavy, but you know,
Yeah,
you
um,
just have to be strong for something you want, right?
that's true.
um, so so tell me something. So
Hmm.
do you play guitar at all? Are you a
I do.
musician or?
I wouldn't call myself a musician, but I do play guitar. I play, more out of fun. I'll, create like a backing track and jam along with that. More often than not, I just noodle. I just sit there, kind of strumming away, trying to see what kind of noises I can make.
Okay, so if somebody wants to has this idea, I'm really interested in building guitars.
Hmm.
So do they have to be a musician? Does it
No,
have that requirement?
I wouldn't say it's a requirement. It certainly helps. It helps to have the ear that's familiar with, the way the instrument sounds and so on. But I wouldn't say that somebody would have to be a musician to get into it. In fact, I mean, I'm really not much of one, to be perfectly honest with you. Um, I can play some, but I much more enjoy like the technical aspect of creating music or creating, you know, an instrument.
Okay. But that's good news for those people who are like interested. And
Hmm.
um so do if you want to build guitars, do you actually need to be really good with your hands? I mean, do you have to have already a talent for these kind of things, or is it, or can you really just learn it no matter what your skills are?
Sure.
Can you literally just
Hmm.
go and learn everything, not knowing, or not even being really talented, let's say, in like me, okay? I,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, like any crafts or anything,
Hmm.
I would just rather jump out the window. Seriously, I can't do it.
Right.
But so would that be something for people like that they actually can get used to it and actually know what they're doing?
I think so. I think so. It depends on how deep into it you want to get. Some people will be well served by the approach of simply buying retail parts and assembling it. At that point, it's not really much different than like putting a model together or something like that. There is some custom fitting of parts sometimes it needs to happen, particularly with guitar necks. Companies like Warmoth and such, they make them on computer controlled lathes and such, and so they're made to a very tight tolerance. But sometimes when you're trying to fit the parts together, they're a little bit tough. So you might have to take sandpaper to whittle down some of it, or even some companies actually leave a little extra wood on the neck because they don't know how wide the neck pocket is that you're going to be mounting it into. So then you'll actually have to shave it down with a router or hand tool of some kind. So it's really a your mileage may vary sort of thing. If you're going for the real inexpensive parts, you're probably going to be doing a lot of hand fitting. Things are not going to be made to a terribly tight tolerance or spec. So there's going to be more work for the builder. Now, with parts like Warmoth, on the other hand, you pay a lot of money for them. Generally speaking, they're the highest cost manufacturer, I think, of the boutique guitar parts world. But that extra money is generally well spent because you get a pretty high quality product out of it that is well fit. But it will be so tightly fitting that you might actually have to work things in a little bit because wood is a fickle substance. It changes shape and size and
Right.
dimensions.
It expands and whatever. Yeah, so basically the way I understand it. Okay, so for the listeners here, if we have listeners, I hope we do. Um, um, so I have absolutely no idea about this. So this is super new to me, and maybe you're listening to and you don't have an idea about this either. So the way I understand it now is that so you can have like parts and just put it together, kind of like an IKEA
Hmm.
thing,
Yeah,
right? That you
absolutely.
just assemble
Hmm.
the thing,
Very true.
or you can literally make everything from scratch, right?
Correct.
Correct. So
Hmm.
those are your two options, and then you can mix and match,
Right.
or you can do it just completely from scratch, the
Hmm.
entire guitar. or you can like say, okay, I buy the neck, but I do the body, or I do the body and buy the neck, or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. And so actually, since you mentioned it, there are some things that I have sitting here. So I have started getting into the actual woodworking side of this. And this, for example, is a base body that I made out of the wood is called black limba. It comes from Africa. And this is in the style of like a Fender jazz bass. But I made this by hand with the assistance of power tools, I should say, because it would be very difficult to do without. And then this is something that I have in progress right now that you've seen, but
Yeah.
I'm very proud of. It's a neck that I'm working on that's made out of a combination of Purple Heart and Amara Ebony.
That is absolutely beautiful. Yeah. So okay. So again, once again, so I'm kind of trying to make this educational for those people who like kind of were thinking about
Sure.
this idea to maybe start building guitars as well. So
Right.
how do you make the I mean, is there like a template or something, or how do you make shapes, or do you
Right.
just come up with your own design, or how do you know exactly what size and all that stuff,
Sure. That's a great question. So it is usually done from templates. What if somebody were to make like a brand new shape, like something that's never been done before? They would create a template out of something like medium density fiberboard or plywood that has the exact shape of the body that they're seeking to make, and then what they will do is sand it down to make sure all the curves are perfect and so on and so forth, because any imperfection in those curves will be transferred onto whatever it is that you're trying to shape, whatever piece of wood that you're attempting to shape. So that template, you'll then apply that to a piece of wood that is larger than the template. With bodies, it's usually a 2-inch piece, or what we call 8/4 thick wood. And it's usually two pieces that are joined in the middle, glued, because it's very rare for pieces of wood in nature to be large enough to make a single piece guitar body out of.
Okay.
Pieces of wood that large tend to be rather expensive. You do run into it on occasion, especially with species like poplar and such, but it will generally be glued down the middle. And you'll take the template, and you'll try to put a center line on it so that you have something to line up over the center of your wooden blank material. And you'll use double-sided tape to tape the template down onto the wood. And you can either trace out the outline of what it is that you're looking to shape, or some people just leave the template on it. But then the next phase is to trim away large portions of wood using a bandsaw or a jigsaw or a scroll saw, something that allows you to steer the work piece around and make precise, high detail cuts that are rough. And then the next phase is to use a router, which is a high-speed rotary tool that is used for shaving off the excess of the edge of a piece of wood. And so that's the part that's probably the most technical, challenging, and also dangerous, because it's a high-speed rotary tool that can grab the work and literally throw it if you're not doing it right. So that part is an adventure a lot of the time. It's where you can get handling issues. It's where you can take your piece of work that you spent so much time creating, and it'll just take a big chunk out of it if you're not careful. So
I was just gonna ask that. That was gonna be my next question.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So when you posted a picture on Facebook, with that red, what is it called? Purple heart
right.
wood. And yeah, I saw the line in the middle, and I was gonna ask that. Why is the line? Why is it not just one piece of wood? But you explained it, that it's a cost issue and also availability. Yeah. That is totally beautiful. Yeah,
So
it's an amazing.
this is actually a single piece of wood. I did luck out and I found Purple Heart that was wide enough to make single piece guitar bodies from, but it's super rare.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah. So so how many guitar bodies did you mess up?
I've messed up quite a few. When I was So when I was learning how to do this, I started off with poplar, which is a very inexpensive wood. It's the cheapest American hardwood. And it's actually useful for building guitars. It's not terribly common or popular because it is such a cheap wood. There's this like a perception that it's not very good for it, but it actually is a good wood. It's also notoriously difficult to work. It has this tendency, it's very soft and it tends to tear big chunks out if you mishandle it. Um, so for cost reasons, I was using that at first, getting in practice on the router and improving. But I definitely ruined many pieces of wood when I was learning. Probably, I don't know, at least 6 to 10 bodies. I think were completely just.
Oh, I think he froze. Grant just froze middle in talking. So so I hope you're enjoying the show so far. And let's see if our technical difficulties will be solved. Yeah, there we go. Oh, I can't hear him right now. No sound. That's okay. That will prepare me for my next question already while I'm waiting.
How's that? Better?
Okay, there we go. Okay, you're back. Cool.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us here 24 hours and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio. Relax Radio.
Hey, we're back. We just had a little commercial in between, and we were just talking about. I don't know what we were talking about. We were talking about the templates and how to like get started, and how many guitar bodies you can ruin when you're a beginner. So if you want to start out with this profession or hobby, so don't worry. Obviously, people ruin body parts on guitar bodies, and so that's totally normal, right?
Yeah, it is.
So my other question would be here, that's really important, I think, for people to know who were thinking about this sort of hobby or profession. So what kind of investment does it take? I mean, how much money do you have to start out with this? I mean, can you really just swing it being broke? Or or do you have to, like have a quite some money on in your savings account? How does that work?
So the answer is yes.
Which one?
It can be fairly expensive. So it depends on what resources you have available in your local community. I was fortunate in that I live in Seattle, where it's a very large city, and there's woodworking clubs uh, for people to join where you can get access to tools and such that you may not have access to normally. It is a very power tool intensive uh, hobby to get into, primarily things like jointers, planers, um, either drum sanders or wide belt sanders are at a minimum necessary, plus table saws as well, because those are needed to take wood from its raw form and turn it into something that is dimensioned and flat. Because you can take a piece of wood and set it on a flat surface, and you can look at it. Maybe it looks flat, but when you set it on a surface, you can see that it's like it tilts, or it,
Right.
you have to lop off all those corners and make sure that it's flat. And so the devices to do that are either in the power tool world, it's called a jointer, that
Hmm.
flattens the board. Uh, they cost several $1,000s just for that tool. But most clubs, pretty much all woodworking clubs, will have one because it's one of the fundamental core tools required for woodworking. There are hand tools that you can get to do it as well, hand planes and such, but I wouldn't recommend hand planing to a beginner. Seems like that would be, uh, unless somebody is just really into the very spiritual nature, like they just really want to get connected with their project in a physical sense.
Hmm.
I would deter hand planing because it is very challenging. The woods that you would work with in building guitars tend to be very, very hard. And so using hand planes on them is an exercise in futility oftentimes. So at the very least, a person would need access to a jointer, a planer, and a table saw. Those are the
Hmm.
three fundamental things. And then ideally, something like a wide belt sander or a drum sander as well, to provide surface finishing.
Hmm. And of course, it saves time too, right? I mean,
Hmm.
if you do it all by hand, it's probably a very well.
Hmm.
Do you have the speaker on? Because I hear myself.
No, it's probably just a little bit echoey.
I don't know where the echo is coming from, but so so basically, yeah, if you do it by hand and let's say you really want to sell it or something, then
Hmm.
it's gonna be a really really expensive instrument
Right,
probably.
right.
And but if you do it for yourself, I can see that happening.
Hmm.
And or if somebody's already
Right,
like a sculptor or something like
hmm,
that, then it's
right.
probably super fun for them to do
Hmm.
that. Um, so if you have done guitars,
Hmm.
okay, so can you do any other string instrument as well, or
They're very
is
similar.
it a difference there?
So I mostly do electric guitars. Admittedly, they are a simpler build than something like say, like a bowed string instrument, like a cello or a violin. So I've never done any sort of lutherie along those elite lines, but solid body electrical instruments like guitars and basses are pretty similar to build. The main difference between them is basses have 4 or 5, maybe 6 strings, and the
Right.
length is significantly longer. They're
Yeah.
34, 5-inch scale, whereas a guitar is anywhere from 24-inch to 25.5-inch scale, unless you do something crazy like a baritone.
Hmm. So how about like a violin or something like that,
Hmm.
or cello, or
Right. So I've never done anything like that, but I do know the construction of them. They are a top and a back, right? So you have two panels, right? One of them is a carved top piece, then there's a carved back piece, and then they have steam bent sides that go
right?
along yeah, and then they glue it all together using hide glue.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and
So it's
typically they're
it's
made with
it's
maple.
similar but different at the
It
same
is,
time
yeah,
because you
it is
don't have
similar.
like
Hmm.
the electric guitar and the bass is like more solid, right?
Right,
Whereas the
correct.
cello or a violin or whatever, they're like a hollow instrument,
Hmm.
like acoustic, right?
Right. Hmm.
So,
Correct.
but theoretically, somebody who already has started with kind of this guitar building, they theoretically could get into it because it's very similar, right?
Correct. I would say that acoustic guitar building in particular is very similar. That is, I've never actually done any acoustic guitar building, but I understand what goes into it, and it's a top and a back, and on the top and back are underneath it, within the chamber of the guitar, are pieces that are glued on for bracing to brace the very very because the parts of wood to acoustic guitar are very very thin.
Right.
So it needs bracing to support itself. And so, yeah, the interior of one of those looks very much like that. And then there's also either a steam vent or, in some cases, it's I don't know what they call the technique, but it's a bunch of small vertical slats that go the entire diameter, the entire circumference of
Hmm.
the guitar body. And the interior of bowed string instruments like a cello or a violin, viola, contrabass are very similar to that.
I mean, it's probably very I don't know. It's like probably fun for somebody to try something like that, something different, right? I would be like, if I would build like guitars, like, and then all of a sudden I would make a cello, I would be like, oh, look at this! I just made a cello. That must be. I mean, because it's first of all, it's a huge instrument, you know, and so it's definitely something to be proud of. I think if you can accomplish doing that. So here's the thing that I don't have, and that's why I'm probably never gonna start building guitars. Patience. So do you have to be a really patient person?
I would say that patience is certainly helpful. Nothing with the business of building a guitar goes quickly. Everything about it takes so much time. If you're working from raw wood, simply the first step, which is creating your body blank, is a 24-hour process, because you have to go to the shop, you have to trim up your wood, you have to make sure that it's flat and dimensioned properly, and then you have to glue it. And that whole process of gluing your wood takes 24 hours for it to fully dry and set and cure. And then so there's a lot of waiting involved. There's so many different steps and phases. It's definitely for somebody who is detail oriented and somewhat organized. I'm not the most organized person, but it definitely requires some system of organization. Additionally, when you get into the finishing part of it, right, actually making it colorful and pretty, or putting a clear coat or whatever sort of finish you want to put on it, that process can take weeks, literally weeks. It depends on what you're using to finish it with. Oil finishes and such can take 2 to 6 weeks just to fully dry. So it's sitting there in your closet, and you're thinking about it every day, how cool it would be to pull it out and put it together and play it. But you know you can't, because the finish is still tacky on it, and if you do, it'll ruin it. So
yeah, it's kind of like waiting on a Christmas. It's kind of like waiting on a Christmas present, you know, and you can't open it, you know, and you just shake the box and like, oh, I want to know what's in there. Yeah. So basically, this hobby or this profession would be pretty ideal right now during lockdown periods, right? Because it takes time, and so nobody would have they couldn't have the excuse that there's nothing to do, right? And they're bored, because it's such a long process to actually build something. And so okay. So obviously people build guitars, and you want to get into this professional hobby because you want to do something totally unique and different from what's available commercially in big chains and whatever. Yeah. So how would one find out about like materials, how what material would be like unique or cool, or so what process does it take for somebody to like okay, okay, let me get it straight. So somebody says, okay, I want to get into it, and so what would be so they get the tools that you said, so they have the savings account, they have the tools, they have the garage they can work in. So what would be the first step? Where do they go to find that kind of, I'm sure you can go to Home Depot or whatever, to buy this kind of wood. So where would one even go and get the very first beginning to start out with this?
Sure. So within most major metropolitan areas, there are dealers, retailers in imported hardwood, domestic and imported, I should say. In the US, our traditional guitar hardwoods are, I'd say alder is probably the number one, with mahogany being very common for Gibson instruments, accents of maple, and others are like walnut, basswood. There's a few others, but the big one in the US is alder. You go to a place that would sell domestic hardwood or imported hardwood. In Seattle, the place that I like to go to is called Crosscut Hardwood. There's another place in nearby Gig Harbor, I believe it's called Eden Saw. I've never been over there, but I should head over there at some point. They're one of the other major local retailers. Additionally, there's you can get dimension lumber products from the likes of Rockler and Woodcraft Woodworking Supply. Um, that tends to be more expensive than if you were to go to a place like Crosscut Hardwoods. Um, the flip side is that it's also pre-dimensioned, so you don't have as much prep work to do with it to get it ready to use.
Okay. So what would you say for people worldwide, not just like focusing on America? So they, what would they type in Google to find where to find that stuff?
I think hardwood lumber near me.
Hardwood lumber?
Yeah, hardwood lumber near me. It's going to vary depending on what market you're in. Many of these woods are under what are called CITES regulations because they're harvested from endangered or at-risk species, so that the harvest of them is tightly controlled, and some nations prevent them from importing. Generally, though, the American stuff like red alder, white alder, basswood, and so on is openly available in most markets.
Okay. So let's see. So tell me about the very best experience you had building a guitar and the very worst.
Okay. So the best experience that I had building a guitar so far was this purple one that I actually have in a case behind me. If I can get it out. It was one that I built over the summer because I needed a lockdown project. And it was one that I started experimenting with finishes and such on. And so I had a lot of fun with it. And I also did a lot of stuff to it. Like it has, you'll notice all these switches and stuff. This one was kind of intended to be, I guess you could say, like a test platform for these pickups in it. Full disclosure, I sell these pickups that's Fishman branded. And I wanted to enable all of the features on them, like every single documented feature that they have. I wanted a guitar that actually had them wired up and accessible. And so this was what I designed to do that. And so hence all of these switches. I'm not going to explain what every one of them does, but they do a lot. And this finish is something that I came up with, which is a shellac with purple dye in it. It's really hard to see.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna say it looks purple. It's very nice, very, very beautiful. So that's the finish, or is that the wood?
That's the finish. Yeah, the wood is American ash.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
so
the neck is maple. So had a great experience with that. Had a lot of fun building it over the course of the summer. And the funny thing is, I had the worst experience actually in that same build. I ended up having to redo that finish on it like 3 times because something would happen to it. Like I get like a little piece of rag or something stuck in it, or like dust, or something would happen to it where I would have to then take alcohol, break down the finish, because shellac breaks down with alcohol. Yeah, I'd have to take denatured alcohol to it and wipe away all of it and then start building it up again. So I did that process like 3 times.
That's where the patience comes in, right? Yeah. That's where patience comes in.
Oh, yeah. It was so frustrating. So many.
Yeah. I mean, I'm doing this show about this, and I'm telling you straight up, I couldn't do it. I could not do it. My guitar would fly out that window right there. I would be like, okay, I'm done. I can't do it. But I know there's like some really patient people out there who can really work on something like for hours and hours and hours, the tiniest little thing, and they just totally, actually, I think they even need it, there's this, they need to do that. I can't do it. I'm a very impatient person. Yeah. So basically, okay, so this is a very multi-dimensional hobby or profession, because you have to literally design, you have to have something in your head, then you have to work with the material, and then you have to do the finishing, and then you have to put in the electronic components
Hmm.
of the guitar too. Okay, let's go to that. So
Okay.
so do you have to have any experience um, with electronics or electrical stuff, or do
It
you have to
helps.
be an electrician or something?
Yeah, it
How do you
certainly
know
helps.
what to wire up and all that?
Right. So for fun, fun, I like to hang out on various Facebook groups for just guitar wiring. Right. So this is a subject that's pretty interesting to me. It's something I know a little bit about. Um, and it's very common for people to get all the way through a guitar build, using parts most of the time, the off-the-shelf parts, and then as soon as they get to the part where they have to start wiring things up, that's when they just, yeah, they lose it. Um, it helps to have some knowledge of electrical components, and especially uh, with the case of audio video, the significance of grounding and what can happen if you either don't have a ground or if you have multiple grounds. Like if you have multiple paths to ground, you can get these weird sort of noises that creep into your signal.
Hmm.
So I deal with a lot of questions on stuff like that on a daily basis on forums and so on and so forth. It helps, but there are pre-wired packages that you can get that really take a lot of the guesswork out of it. And companies like EMG, they make pickups and other electronics for guitars and basses. They've actually taken it to the next level by developing toolless, solderless systems where you can buy a set of pickups from them for a couple $100 and install them into the guitar using nothing but what they provide you, and everything will work. It,
Okay, well
so
that's pretty good. That's
but
for
yeah, they take a lot
good
of
for
the
the
guesswork out of it.
yeah people who are not really experienced with that. That's a pretty
Mhm.
good thing to know.
Right.
Um, cool. So let's see. Okay, so did you ever have any injuries doing this? So what is the let me see your fingers.
Yeah.
Do you have them all yet?
So yes,
Still?
so I have, obviously, nicks and cuts. Yeah, so you can see it on my hand
Yeah.
there. I've gotten a lot of splinters, nicks, cuts. Um, Nothing horrible from a power tool, thankfully.
Okay.
I personally believe that if you've injured yourself with a power tool, you were really doing something wrong, um, and you haven't been properly trained in its operation. The two most dangerous tools in the shop are the table saw and the router, at least the ones that I use. And every time I sit down at one of those, I always it's a frame of mind that you know this thing could maim or kill. But that said, I have gotten lots of splinters. Some of them are pretty nasty. Some woods actually have bacteria and such trapped in them. Open grain woods, things like ash, purple heart to a degree. A wood called wenge grows in Africa. Other things, if you get splinters with it, you really need to pull it out and disinfect it right away because it can get infected. So far, nothing too serious. I did have when I was handling a Purple Heart board actually at the lumber yard. I was just laying it down onto my cart and it put a 3-inch splinter into my hand. That it kind of went through sideways like that, but I had to pull it out. And yeah, just a lot of that. A lot of nicks and cuts. Handling router bits, like changing them out. I've nicked myself on them because they're just an exposed knife, basically. But nothing too serious. Nothing that has made me think, wow, maybe I should try something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely. So
Mhm.
safety is um a big part of
It
this.
is.
You
It
should
is.
know what you're dealing with and
Right.
stuff. And I'm happy to hear you okay.
Yeah. I actually took. I
I
took
mean,
classes. I took
I
classes.
worked in a wood shop
Mhm.
once, but it was just like a kind of like a training kind of thing,
Mhm.
and I just realized that I wasn't meant for anything like that, and I really dislike the wood dust that goes into your nose,
Right.
you know
Mhm.
and it's like all, and you blow your nose and it's all black coming out all the times.
Or purple.
Or for whatever what you're working with, I guess. Yeah. Oh, what did I work with? That's
Mhm.
just blow nose and
Pretty
oh,
much.
okay.
Yeah.
But So yeah, that was definitely not for me. I know it's I mean, I was jealous. I must admit, I was really jealous seeing, the other people making some really cool stuff, And I tried to make some shelf, and it really looked horrible at the end. It was just really like, I'm not gonna put that in my apartment. You know what I'm saying? I tried, but I mean, some people can come up with really amazing, amazing stuff. And a funny thing is too that I know 3 other guitar builders actually, which is it's funny that I kind of that I know these people. I also know people. I also know 4 people who broke their necks. Can you imagine that? It's like, what's up with that? I'm like, why do I always know multiple people of the same stuff? But anyway, I know 3 more guitar builders, so 4 in total.
That's cool.
And it's always super interesting to see what they come up with. And especially when you come up with your own design. Have you ever done anything like that? Have you ever come up with your own design without a template, or have you made a template yourself?
I'm working on it. I am drawing up some stuff right now, but so far nothing. Everything that I've been doing is derivative. It's copying tried and true designs, but it is something that I want to do. I have some things kicking around in my head, but it's really a matter of getting them drawn up. The other thing is too is
okay. Can I stop you here real quick? Sure. Let's take a break real quick. Okay, and then we'll be back in a minute.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. Hey, welcome back. So we're sitting here talking about guitars and specifically building guitars here. I'm here with Grant Caroil, who is in Seattle, and I'm in Portland, Oregon right now. And let me recap real quick what we were just talking about. So basically, we talked about how one can get into this business or building guitars as a hobby. And so we went through possible injuries, how much what it takes to actually get started, like financially, and if you actually have to be a musician to do this. And the answers were no, you don't have to be a musician to do this hobby or profession. You and you don't even have to be super talented with wood, as I hear it from Grant. You can just really learn everything that needs to be learned, and you don't have to be a millionaire. You don't have to have a huge saving account, but it takes some investments to get with this started. And so yeah, and of course, you know, it requires a bunch of tools, power tools and stuff like that. So definitely need to make sure that you're safe what you're doing. And what were we talking about just now? I kind of forgot what was the last thing we talked about. Was it the injuries? I don't even know.
Right. I was actually just getting to the part where I had mentioned that, like, to minimize injury, I think training is the most important thing. A lot of the woodworking clubs out there will not let somebody work on any particular tool until somebody has supervised them or briefed them in its operation safely. Things like table saws and routers, any sort of rotary tool that spins really fast or has a high rotational rate, is a potential safety concern, particularly table saws, because the blade spins towards you, and they're high output device. You know, even the smaller ones are 5 to 7, 10 horsepower, and in just a single rotation, they can grab a piece of wood and accelerate it to about 180 miles per hour, just in the blink of an eye, and they'll throw it. And
Wow.
so it can, yeah, it can come right back and hit the operator in the chest, so or in the face, or whatever. So the greatest concern with the table saw, a lot of people think it's getting cut, but if your hands, you know, if you're aware of where your hands are, you'll never get cut by a table saw. The concern is mishandling a piece through it and not keeping forward pressure on it, and it'll pick it up and throw a piece of wood at you, and it can cause all sorts of injuries.
So do you wear any safety stuff? Do you need
Yeah,
like
I
goggles?
do. So it depends on what I'm working with. Generally, at a minimum, if I'm on a table saw, a jointer, or anything with a rotary cutter that can create splinters or stuff, that it always seems to come right in the face. It doesn't matter, you know. it always seems to just spray like right up at you. So safety glasses are super important. You know, you only have one set of eyes and you can't replace them. So yeah, safety glasses are definitely a must. A couple nights ago, when I was working on this piece, actually, there's a significant amount of wood removal that happens here. Here in here, and it happens through a combination of on a drill press. That's where the bulk material removal happens, and that's a fairly slow, safe process. But then when you get into the part where you're trying to machine the edge and you're trying to get a nice smooth bottom, that comes on a router, which is a very dangerous tool if mishandled. And this router that I use, it has all sorts of safeties built into it. It has like almost like a blast shield, you know, built into it. So it's supposed to keep all the chunks within it, and you attach it to a shop vac so it can extract them. But that thing is capable of creating chunks faster than the shop vac can pull it out. So they need somewhere to go, and I find that they bounce underneath it and then come right back up in my face. So I was very glad I had my safety glasses on at that time, because as soon as I started operating that thing, it just started throwing all sorts of stuff up in my face. So
Wow.
safety glasses are a must. Also, hearing protection is a good idea, because things like routers are very loud. Table saws are not too bad, but band saws, when you're steering a piece around on the band saw a lot and it's cutting across grain, it has a tendency to screech and squeal, makes a horrible sound, and it will definitely behoove you to put on some hearing protection. That's generally it, though. It's usually just eye protection and hearing protection. You don't want to use gloves, because rotating tools have a tendency to grab things. So you want to minimize any loose clothing or gloves or any of that. Better to have bare skin and something that it could grab and pull into.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Don't want to lose a few fingers, but
right, because you won't just lose one, you'll lose a few. Things like here, I'll show you an example. I do have it right here. So this is the case that I use to store all of my rotating cutting tools. put this in perspective, everything just fell out. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. So this is a router bit that I used a couple nights ago to shape a body like a Fender Jazzmaster. And as you'll see, like this is my hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a big hand. This thing is gigantic. It would remove a finger really easily. It goes, what is it, sort of 16,000 RPMs, I think? Yeah. So it spins at 16,000 RPMs and it's designed to cut a 2-inch, like you have a 2-inch piece of wood and it just goes along this cutter.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely want some education on how to operate those tools because you only have these once. So
Absolutely. So, when you got into all this first, did you have like somebody who taught you? Like, did you have like an idol or like a teacher, a sensei, somebody to
Right.
to like guide you and give you all the tips firsthand and or like just motivate you to do it to, like give you something
Sure.
to achieve?
So I didn't really have anybody that I looked up to that was doing this. What I did find was a humongous community of people who were doing this, and they all tell each other how they do the various things that they do. And I find that just about every question that's ever been asked regarding how to build a guitar or is this a good idea has already been answered to some degree or another. So I just started networking within the various guitar building communities, and they tend to be very accepting, very open. They don't tend to be terribly covetous of trade secrets or anything like that. So it's a really good, positive sort of collaboration that occurs. Very highly recommended. Any sort of Facebook groups for lutherie, amateur luthier is one that I like to go to, and then there's another one. It's called The Amateur Luthier, and they are, discussion communities where you can just present any sort of question that you might have. For the actual woodworking stuff, I took some classes actually at the beginning of 2020. It was just a general woodworking class. I wanted to learn how to use table saws and so on and so forth, the various tools that I would need to actually build the wooden components to a guitar. I found that very helpful. It's really, really good to have somebody tell you the right way to use a table saw because it is very easy to use them wrong. And if you do, it could be injurious. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's a good idea then. So if people don't really have experience with the tools to actually like go somewhere and learn it a little bit just so they get comfortable and like know what they're doing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
A supervised sort of experience where you can learn and somebody will teach you how to keep all your fingers.
Cool. So did they give you like some little projects to do? Like did you like make some shelves or tables or something?
It was like a little tool, like a little garden tool carrier. I actually use it to keep my paint and finishing supplies in. So.
Oh, cool. So,
Yeah,
a little bonus, little extra
it's
bonus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So, okay, like, let's see. I had a question in my mind. So, okay, so have you done like have you designed for somebody who wanted a guitar? And if so, do they bring their own design, or so do they just come to you and say, "Hey, this is how I want it"? Do they have like a sketch or something, where or how does that work?
I have not gotten into any sort of like custom commissioned work yet. That's coming at some point. I think once I gain some additional confidence in my ability to do the finishing part. That's one aspect of my game that desperately needs to improve. And it's mostly too because I don't have a good place to do it right now. A wood shop isn't a good place to do finish work because there's dust in the air and such, so you get stuck in your finish. But I do endeavor to do that sort of work. Also, a friend of mine and I, we are turning up. It's called a CNC, and it is a computer-controlled machining station for manufacturing purposes. So we're hoping to actually start doing some custom design work using that, so that we don't actually have to even do it from templates. We can just put in the wood stock, zero out the machine, hit the play button basically, and then watch as it cuts the shape, and then we do all the next various steps, the fitting and finish work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm definitely gonna be one of the customers eventually. We talked
Yeah.
about this on Facebook. I play a little bass, you know. I mean, I don't know if I would call myself a musician per se either, but I mean, I was in a band, and you know, I play some
So that
guitar. I can
qualifies.
keep time. So and I definitely gonna be one of the customers eventually. You know, maybe I have to, you know, win some money first or something, but definitely want to have one of those travel bases. I
Cool.
really that I recently traveled to Europe, and I realized, and I took my bass with me, which was a big mistake. Don't get me
Right.
started.
Yeah.
Carrying a bass case around with you is pretty heavy, you know, and it's not fun. It's
There
not
are,
fun.
yeah. There's also customs issues that can arise when trying to travel with an instrument. Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but only I'd say within the past, what was it, a couple years ago, the CITES regulations were restructured such that musicians' instruments could no longer be confiscated for being made out of embargoed woods. So, good example is Brazilian rosewood is considered to be one of the finest guitar woods on the planet, but it's also under embargo because Brazil cut down way too much of it, and there's endangered critically, and so it's illegal to import. So you can only use old stock that is, you know, pre-existing and such, and the amount of it that's available is very small. So people will make fantastically valuable instruments with this stuff because it's old. Some of it is 100 years old that's been sitting in a closet or at a lumber yard somewhere, and so they'll make these beautiful acoustic guitars out of it, and it'll be given to some touring working musician who will then take it out of the country, and then a customs agent in a foreign country will confiscate it because they don't have any documentation proving that it's not made with illegal embargoed wood.
Wow.
So yeah, so U.S. Customs and Border Patrol actually had warehouses filled with instruments that they had taken from traveling international musicians, many of which were probably perfectly legal to have, but there was no documentation provided that demonstrated that the wood came from somewhere that was ethically harvested. So,
Oh wow, I
so
didn't know that. That sucks. That's
that is a
that's a
trouble.
pretty bummer, especially if
Right.
you think about it. If you paid like several $1,000s for your
Oh, yes.
instruments, and all of a
Right.
sudden it's gone, and then what are they gonna do with it? I wonder. Do they just throw them away, or
They
what do
see
they
them
do
in
with that
evidence.
stuff?
As far as I understand, they can't throw them away. They just like it sits in limbo because
They
they can
just
never give
collect
it
them.
back. At the same time, it just sits there in a warehouse collecting dust. I don't know if they offered any recourse to the people who had stuff confiscated, but I do know that they restructured the laws here in the U.S. such that if a person were to travel here with a guitar or an instrument, that it would no longer be confiscated.
Wow,
That's
maybe they should open a museum or something with it at least. You know, at least, you know, like,
yeah.
okay, look at all this stuff that you're not supposed to
Here's
travel
a
with or
funny
something.
story for you. So a month before they changed this law, before they restructured the regulations here in the U.S., there was a shipment interdicted in Anchorage, Alaska, actually, of about I want to say eight PRS Custom 24 guitars. So we're talking, $6,000 to $10,000 guitars, eight of them, seized by Customs and Border Patrol in Anchorage. They were being exported. They weren't being imported. They were being exported out of the country to someone in Taiwan, I believe, but illegally so. And they were all confiscated a month before the law would have been changed to permit that
Wow.
transaction to occur.
Yeah, that's such a bummer, you know. And I mean, I understand because, you know, that's an issue I'm kind of having. It's like so, you know, you have to like, I don't know how to even explain it. It's like because you're working with wood, At the same time, I love trees. I'm a tree hugger.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I'm a tree hugger. I love trees. I love nature. And I'm always sad when I see trees being cut down, but at the same time, I'm playing an instrument, you know,
Yep.
and that's a conflict. That's an inner conflict in itself for me. And it's hard because, so I kind of understand the law. I understand that people should not be encouraged to use material that is endangered. I mean, even if it's not endangered, I still think it's sad because if you look at, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, so for people who watch this or listen to this and never been to America, I mean, we have some gigantic, beautiful trees here. I mean, I'm just that's something I love about America, the beautiful large trees. And then you look at that tree and you think those trees were around like thousands of years, some of them, and even like average size tree is several hundred years, and then all of a sudden you just cut it down to make a guitar. You know what I'm saying? It's yeah, it's such a conflict for me, and so therefore I do understand the law, but at the same time I'm thinking, at least they should do something good with that stuff. At least if they take it away from the people, at least like literally, I mean, I was joking about the museum, but it wouldn't really even be a bad idea, at least showcase it somehow or do something creative with it or educational with it or something, instead of just have it in a warehouse,
right?
Like rotting away, dusting away, and never ever seen in this lifetime again, most likely. It's just too sad,
I'm glad that you mentioned that though, because in the case of those 8 PRS guitars, they actually lent them to the Anchorage School District for their music program.
Oh, they did?
Ordinarily, though, they would just sit in a warehouse. But there is a growing awareness now that this is happening, that instruments are being seized by Customs and Border Patrol agents, not just in the U.S., but other countries as well. So there is a growing awareness of it, and people are starting to recognize, hey, this is kind of wrong. Something needs to be done to restructure the laws, because I agree with you. We do need to be doing things to dissuade people from deforestation, right? There's a way that we can ethically harvest this stuff. And here's a good example for you, right? In the U.S., most of our domestic hardwood is sustainably grown. It has been for the better part of 30 years now, 20, 30 years. If you drive around like the Olympic Peninsula of Washington, you'll see the effect that logging has had on the terrain, but you'll also see where they've replanted. And 20 years ago now, there's a new forest where the old one was in its place. And so, as long as we approach this with the mindset that we need to do this sustainably, I think it's okay. The other thing is too, is certain wood species that are very, very popular for guitar building, especially high-end stuff like Gibson, for example, uses exclusively Honduran mahogany in the making of their guitar bodies. It's a very expensive wood, and up until a few years ago, and Gibson has actually been in trouble for this a few times for purchasing from unethical sources. The wood, Honduran mahogany, is no longer legal to import from Honduras because of the same reason that you can't get Brazilian rosewood. Honduran mahogany is illegal, but there are sustainable programs growing it in places like Philippines. And so the Honduran mahogany that is imported into the US is actually sustainably grown in places like Philippines and Malaysia, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of programs in place to do this sustainably. Fender recently actually announced that they would no longer be offering their standard models in swamp ash, because swamp ash, it's called that because it grows in the swampy areas in the southeast, like Florida, Georgia, so on. It's particularly prized for its lightweight and its beautiful grain, but it's also kind of an endangered wood now in the U.S. And so the sustainable supply is now about 20 to 30 years away. So Fender has completely removed swamp ash from its line of all but the custom guitars. So if you wanted something in swamp ash from Fender, you'd have to spend $3,000, $4,000 for it. So it's going to dramatically reduce the amount that actually get produced, and therefore the demand for it will lower.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool that there's an awareness about that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That we like, or we I mean, with this whole border thing, confiscating things, I'm thinking at least they should make a law where people can come back and maybe provide the documents, to get the instruments back. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that there's an awareness a little bit about all this, because like I said, it's hurting tree huggers like me,
Yeah.
to know that our nature is being destroyed. But so we're running out of time now. We're doing 1 hour today. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I know this is a topic we could talk about it longer and longer, because especially when it comes to this whole environmental thing, it's a whole different topic on its own. But it was really cool to get an idea. I mean, I learned a lot, because like I said, I don't know anything about this at all. Don't make me build a guitar, please. Nobody, don't ever do that. I have no idea about it, but I think it's very interesting, because as a matter of fact, I have talked recently to somebody, which was really interesting, because I was like, I don't even know how we got into that, but all of a sudden we were talking about guitar building, and he was like, oh, I would actually like to learn that. And I'm like, hey, my show is about that,
Cool.
You need to tune in or watch it on YouTube, because these are really important points for somebody to actually know what they're getting into, and what it takes. So thank you so much for being here with me and talking about guitar building. The next episode is gonna be, we're gonna talk about cats. So it's gonna be a whole different issue. My next guest is gonna be Ken, who's a friend of mine in America, in Michigan. And so he's a huge cat lover, so we're gonna talk about cats. So that's gonna be the next episode.
That'll be fun.
The history of cats and funny stories about cats and cats. Yeah, so thanks again for tuning in, everybody. Thank you. And thanks for being here, Grant. And yeah, next week, Cat Talk here on the Sonic Szilvi Show.
Cool.
And I hope you had fun. And until next week, bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.